So once again, welcome everyone. We will start the webinar now, and we also have a guest with us today. His name is NiMo, and NiMo, I will let you introduce yourself in a couple of minutes. I will just briefly start with some introductions to what this is and what we're going to do today. So NetApp is the cloud-led data-centric software company. Maybe you've heard that before, but the whole key here is that we have several touch points that we focus on. So the main thing is that we're data centric. We're working with storage, providing storage solutions in different areas. But the magic happens in the software. And the thing is that we are able to run the software in multiple environments. Either you can buy the software as a dedicated solution in a box with hard drives, or you can purchase and run the software and leverage all the functions in the cloud, leveraging the cloud infrastructure. We also have other software that helps customers with both their cloud journey and cloud optimization and cloud controls. And also we deal with backups and other features that are associated with storage in these different environments. So maybe you think of NetApp as only selling hardware, drives, and disk arrays in the data center, but that's not the case anymore. We do that, but we do a lot of other things as well. And what is TechPro? So this is a Swedish slide, but the idea is that we meet up every once and then and focus on discovering what's in how we can leverage the technology that NetApp producing in different ways, and to discuss and share ideas and knowledge and expertise across the community. And a little bit about myself as well. I'm leading this community group, and I work as a technical partner manager or partner technical lead at NetApp. I'm also involved in the Swedish VMware user group. I've used to be the leader before. I like to talk and do everything about virtualization, storage, containers, automation, and cloud. And I would be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. I also have a blog on virtue.com. I talk a bit about automation, virtualization, and all of these things as well. So with that said, I would like to hand over to NiMo, who's going to talk about our latest offering in the VMware Cloud on AWS and how we can support that offering. So please.
Thank you, John. And thank you for having me here. So good morning, everyone. And thank you for taking the time. Early morning, I wouldn't say early morning. I believe it's 9:30 in Sweden, but then I'm in the UK, but yeah, it's 8:30 here. But thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedule to come and listen to us and understand our new offering. Right, with that said, let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started from there. Okay, I hope you guys are able to see my screen okay.
Yeah,
right,
it's okay.
Perfect, cool. So before we jump deep into the slides and talk about the integration, let me do a quick introduction. As John introduced me, I'm Niyaz Mohamed. People call me NiMo and not the Finding Nemo. I work as a principal solutions architect here at NetApp within the NetApp Corporate Solutions Group. My primary responsibilities include identifying solution gaps, creating solution integrations with different hyperscalers and other vendors, and then providing solutions to our customers that would help them ease their deployments and take as much as benefit from the deployment architecture. So on a day-to-day basis, I work with different hyperscalers, understand the new features, look for integration opportunities, work with customers at the same time, understand their requirements, and kind of tie that together so as to build the solution. And the one that we're going to talk about is also such a solution where we found there is good opportunity to introduce a simple solution and which is similar to on-premises that will help our customers to easily migrate and then realize the benefits of cloud deployments, right? So in today's session, we will focus on VMware Cloud on AWS and the AWS FSx for ONTAP PaaS offering. We have similar integrations in other hyperscalers, although they are in different phases at the moment. For Azure, it's actually in public preview. And for Google, for the VMware engine side, it's actually in private preview. And we will have further sessions in the same webcast where we'll talk about each one of them as and when we transition into general availability. So with that said, let's get started with VMware Cloud deployments. So I'm sure you guys have heard about the announcement that was made at VMware Explore at San Francisco last couple of weeks back. And there, they announced the general availability of Amazon FSx for ONTAP as an NFS supplemental data store for VMware Cloud deployments. It's a great achievement and it's a great announcement that really brings in, great capabilities to the customers who are currently running VMware Cloud with SDDCs, or for those customers who are currently planning and also evaluating a cloud movement, right? So let's quickly look at the agenda. I'll not use much of the slides. I'm going to be running a live demo, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. However, to quickly go through, what is that you're going to learn in the next 40 to 45 minutes, because I want to make sure you're going to spend time with me and you're learning as much as possible from this. So to set that expectations, let's quickly look at what are we going to cover. And if there is anything that is not covered in this particular agenda and you want to actually ask, since this is an interactive session, feel free to ask or put the question in the chat and we can actually talk through that. With that said, we're going to start with why this integration. That in essence means, what is the challenge that VMware, NetApp, and AWS is trying to solve together. Then we'll look at what is FSx ONTAP, right? Then we'll go to the support that we introduced, which is NFS Datastore. Then we'll also look at, is it just for NFS Datastore, or are there other use cases from a VMware standpoint? Keep in mind, FSx for ONTAP is applicable to any kind of workload within AWS, when customers are moving to the cloud. However, from the specific workload standpoint, which is VMware, we will talk through NFS Datastore and also about the in-guest storage options. And that's what we talk about, the beyond Datastore support. And then we'll look at the use cases. So obviously you would be thinking, hey, how do I position this solution? When do I actually talk to my customer about this, right? So we'll look at that. And then we'll look at a couple of tools that we have introduced, which will make it easy for you guys to go and talk to the customer, right? And then we'll get into the demo, right? So I'll try to finish the slide deck part within the first 15 minutes or so, and then we'll go into the live demo aspect. And again, as I said, at any point, if you get a question, feel free to actually raise your hand and ask the question. Okay, so as you guys know, most of the customers are currently looking at migrating their workloads to the cloud. Every organization has a mandate to move their workloads, be it the existing ones or the new ones that they're actually working on, to be deployed in the cloud, which is absolutely the right thing to do, because public cloud do offer the capabilities, specifically the elasticity and the swiftness in actually building a solution, be it for a real-time deployment model for production, or it can be for quickly testing the solution, or even to actually run in a hybrid model. And this is where NetApp really shines and brings in the data management capabilities that we have, right? Now, if you look at the customer expectations with all the aspects that I talked about, every customer expects their storage, their compute, and their performance to be elastic. And if you see from a compute standpoint, if you take AWS as an example, you have got EC2 instances, you have different t-shirt sizes. Now, it also allows you to actually change the instance on the fly, right? So that way you can actually change from one to other, depending upon the instance type and the compatibility, but you have the option to actually change that. Now, you can actually start with a smaller instance and change that as well. Again, that is the elasticity that is provided by EC2 instances. And when you change that, you can attach the storage onto it without any issues. So you can scale the compute without adding storage at any point in time. And by increasing or changing the compute type, you have the ability to actually get additional storage bandwidth and the network bandwidth. Similarly, from a performance standpoint, people expect, oh, I should start at this point. Say, I will start with 1 gigabytes throughput and 20,000 IOPS. And then later, depending upon my requirement, I want to increase. Now, why do people think in this direction? For the simple reason, the biggest cost generator in the cloud is primarily the compute, the performance, and the storage. And people want to actually, right size them from the beginning, and that's how they look at it. Now, if you look at the capacity standpoint, it's exactly the same, right? They expect to start small and then increase and then shrink as and when needed. Now, if we put this in the context of VMware Cloud SDDC within AWS, you'd see you have the ability to add additional host, right? So just to take a step back and talk about, I'm sure you guys know about VMware Cloud on AWS. However, VMware Cloud on AWS is nothing but similar to what you deploy in on-premises from an ESXi standpoint. You would actually get a number of hosts that you need depending upon your performance and the capacity requirements. And then you can actually scale as and when needed. By default, you have to start with 3 nodes for production. You can also start with a single node for POC purposes, which can go up to 60 days. And you can start even with 2 nodes from a pilot light cluster standpoint, or with 3 from a production deployment standpoint. And the good part about this deployment is you can add host as and when required. It's just about scaling out the cluster by saying, okay, add 1 host or 2 hosts or 3 hosts, and you can go up to 16 hosts in a single cluster, right? So VMware Cloud today provides you the ability to scale the compute, without any issues. With simple click, you can do that, and it hardly takes around 15 minutes or so to actually add and host. So that's the simplicity that is actually brought onto the table. Similarly, from performance standpoint, you can change the host type, or you can actually add additional host swaps to improve the performance too. Now, when it comes to capacity, if you have to add additional capacity, that's where the challenge comes in, right? If you look at the host that we spoke about, each host will give you 10.37 terabyte. If you're going with an i3 metal, right? So there are 2 types, not 2, there are 3 types of host type. The latest one was announced at VMware Explore. So if you start with the 2 old ones, which is i3 metal and i3 EN metal. Now i3 gives you 10.37 per host. And since this is an hyper-converged infrastructure deployment, that is the storage that you can have from a single host. Now, if you want to increase the capacity, you need to add an additional host. So that comes with, adding additional CPU and memory, which might not be required for the application, right? So, and if you look at i3 EN metal, then you get around 45 terabyte, but then the host price itself is different because it gives you 3 times, but the host price is also different. Now, they have also introduced i4i, which is announced, but it's not yet available, from a GA standpoint. However, that is in the middle between i3 and i3 EN. So you can use that as well. And i4i provides you around 20 terabyte of capacity. Now, if you look at the constant capacity for each of the hosts, that's where the challenge really comes in for customers, right? And I'm sure most of you guys know that running a VMware workload in on-premises is all about data. The amount of storage capacity is humongous in every data center. Now, if you want to actually migrate this from on-premises into VMware Cloud or any other cloud, running VMware, you need to make sure you are able to scale the storage independent of the compute. And this is where NetApp, VMware, and AWS work together so as to bring in this easy solution that will help customers to scale the storage and the performance, independent of adding a compute. And we'll talk through this further during the demo of our TCO estimators. Now, just to quickly show that in a graphical representation, because the CPU and the memory would be kind of constant for sources depending upon the VM requirements. However, storage is something that would actually be asymmetrical from a deployment standpoint. As you see on the screen, if the customer requirements are around 200 cores and 3 terabyte of memory that is actually aggregated across all the virtual machines, and it might be 85 terabyte for a single customer, but then for another customer, that would be around 300 terabyte. Now, you can see for every customer and depending upon the workload, the storage capacity would actually differ. And this becomes the inhibiting factor, right? So this is where we introduced NFS Datastore. And I'm sure you guys are aware of this as well, that customers have been running NFS Datastores in on-premises for years. And it is a trusted solution. And most of the on-premises environments have NFS Datastores running in their data centers so as to cater their VMware workloads. And so, hence, it was a natural choice for us to choose NFS version 3 as the data store that will be used for supporting VMware Cloud. So to quickly talk about FSx for ONTAP, as I said, FSx for ONTAP has been out there for almost a year. It is a complete PaaS offering introduced by AWS, which is powered by NetApp ONTAP operating system. So that's the beauty of the solution, where you can now leverage all the enterprise class storage functionalities, including file sharing, multiple protocols and so on within the AWS console. That too, without knowing or understanding the storage know-how of it. All you need to do is just go buy FSx ONTAP from the console and get started. Now, if you know ONTAP, fantastic. You can make more changes in there. You can actually customize it the way you want it, like you have been doing in on-premises. If you are a non-NetApp customer, it's again easy because it's so transparent that you don't have to worry about the storage part, the administration, the management, the upgrades, nothing. All you need to know about is how much capacity do I need? And the magic of ONTAP is going to work on those workloads. And that comes in forms of efficiencies, snapshots, and so on, which we'll talk through. So just to spend a minute talking about what FSx ONTAP is, because that would actually pave the way to say, why is it super beneficial for VMware workloads? And you'll also understand it's just not for the VMware workloads. We have FSx for ONTAP used for all the other kinds of workloads, including SAP HANA, which needs sub-millisecond latency, and that is certified by SAP. So you can use that. You can use it for SQL, Oracle workloads, leveraging the elasticity that we spoke about with thin provisioning and all the other storage efficiency capabilities that we provide. And then it can be used with Kubernetes applications. So if you're deploying it with EKS or ECS, or even with SaaS Boost, one of their open source solution, you can use FSx for ONTAP. So you can see FSx for ONTAP can be plugged into any workload that you have, and it would just show you the magic. And also keep in mind iSCSI support, which is something that customers crave for in the cloud, which is what people generally use in on-premises from a block standpoint, apart from FC. This FSx for ONTAP provides you that in AWS. That's another unique capability. Now, with that, let's get into some features of FSx for ONTAP. FSx for ONTAP allows up to 192 terabyte of SSD capacity. And with tiering enabled, it can go up to 2 petabyte of capacity as well. And it also provides multiple SKUs. When I say SKUs, it provides you different service levels starting from 128 megabytes per second all the way up to 2 gigabytes per second. And not just that, it provides you 4 nines of availability. Now, if you look at this and stitch it to the Datastore support, it also applies to the Datastore support, and you can create multiple data stores, and you can easily carve out multiple data stores from the available provisioned file system. The recommendation with the data store is to use 512 megabytes per second, although FSx for ONTAP starts from 128 and then goes up to 2 gigabytes. But the recommendation based on our testing is to use starting from 512 megabytes per second throughput skew all the way up to 2 gigabytes per second throughput with appropriate IOPS. Now, many a times from a migration standpoint or evaluation standpoint, customers don't have the exact amount of capacity or the throughput requirements. So they're just coming in to make sure, hey, is this solution viable? Now, if you are in any of that situations, I would say you can easily boost the confidence of the customer by saying, customer, you can start small, absolutely fine with it, because FSx for ONTAP provides you the ability to easily increase or decrease the volume capacity, the throughput, and the IOPS associated with the file system. Now, the only thing you need to keep in mind is when you create the file system will have a capacity that you specify, then that is the base capacity. You can always scale up from there and scale out as well with multiple file systems. However, you cannot bring down the file system capacity from what it was actually created. And I'll show you that as well. But just keep in mind, FSx for ONTAP file system allows you to increase the throughput, increase the IOPS, and increase the volume capacity and shrink them as needed. Now, apart from this performance and the dynamic scaling capabilities that we spoke about, why it is unique for Datastore support is because of the ONTAP goodness. As I said, FSx ONTAP is powered by ONTAP. So that means you get all of the capabilities, everything in terms of snapshots, replication, cloning, then SnapMirror, all of these capabilities that are available. And from a high availability standpoint, FSx for ONTAP provides multi-AZ deployment. That means multi-availability zone. And availability zone is nothing but a data center in AWS, similar to what we have in the on-premises world. So you can have multiple data centers within a region. Generally, it's up to 3, or it can be more. And FSx for ONTAP follows the multi-availability zone deployment model. We also have single AZ. However, from a data store support, we started with multi-AZ deployments, right? And with the multi-AZ deployment, you get synchronous mirroring between the zones. That in essence means if there is a failure of a data center or a zone where FSx for ONTAP is deployed, there won't be any impact as it will automatically move to the second zone using floating IP mechanisms. And your workload will be always up and running, and it'll be transparent. Ain't that cool? That's something that customers are really looking for in the cloud. The ability to actually sustain a zone failure and have the workloads running in a transparent fashion. Now, during the GA support, which was announced at VMware Explore, we are supporting 4 NFS version 3 data stores. That means, unlike having a single vSAN data store in VMware SDDC, you can have multiple data stores mimicking what you have in on-premises world, because every on-premises customer have multiple data stores, right? Now, so that's about FSx for ONTAP. Now, let's look at, the key points that you need to keep in mind. So we did cover about with NFS data store support, you can go up to 4 data stores per cluster. And this is completely certified by VMware Cloud. And there is API as well as graphical user interface integration with VMware Cloud. And the benefit is, as you know, we discussed, you can right size your VMware SDDC to make sure, your hosts as well as the storage is as per the requirement and there is no over provisioning required, right? And along with that, you can use all the world-class data management capabilities that every customer is looking for. So now, So it's time to look at the architecture. So if you look at the architecture diagram that you see on the screen now, there is a lot going on in there. However, trust me, majority of this is actually automated by VMware Cloud. Now, for customers to understand how this is done, we have actually made this architecture diagram as elaborated as possible. But if you look at it, it's very simple. There is two VPCs. One VPC is the shadow VPC that is created by VMware and managed by VMware within AWS. And there is the customer who creates a VPC for FSx for ONTAP. Now, for those who are familiar with VMware Cloud within AWS, when you deploy the SDDC, you do that from VMware Cloud Console. So you need to have a VMware account and you go into the VMware Cloud Console and then you deploy the software-defined data center. That is what SDDC means, into your AWS account. So when you do that, you specify an additional VPC within AWS, which is called as the connected VPC, and that is connected using an ENI, which is providing around 25 gigabits per second, and that is used to connect all the services from AWS standpoint, right? Now, to connect FSx for ONTAP, the recommendation is to create a new and a designated VPC where you will deploy FSx for ONTAP in multi-availability zone mode. Now, if you look at the architecture here, so once the SDDC is deployed, which is completely managed by VMware, then you need to create an SDDC group, which in turn creates VMware Transit Connect. A VMware Transit Connect is nothing but a wrapper around AWS Transit Gateway, right? So it automates the deployment of Transit Connect, so that way Transit Connect is used to connect the data stores that is running in the VPC, which is the new and the designated VPC, and the ESXi host that is running in the VMware SDDC VPC. Now, once the SDDC group is created and the Transit Connect is in place, the next step is to actually create a Transit Gateway attachment from this particular VPC and attach that to the Transit Connect here. That is it. Then you have the connectivity in place. Now you have to deploy the multi-availability zone FSx for ONTAP, and again, it's a couple of clicks, or you can use CloudFormation template or any other scripting mechanism to do that. Once you deploy it, you will have FSx ONTAP running in two separate availability zones with a floating IP, which will enable FSx for ONTAP to actually automatically fail over in case there is a zonal failure. That is why the floating IP is used. The floating IP is not part of the generic CIDR used within a VPC, right? Any of the subnet ranges that is used within the VPC. So that is why if Transit Connect and Transit Gateway is required, so as to actually enable the communication by having the appropriate routes in place. Once the FSx ONTAP is created, you can easily mount because you have the attachment as well as the Transit Connect in place. And with the appropriate routes updated and the security groups in place, it will automatically happen. Now, when I spoke through this, it took around maybe 3 to 4 minutes. But in reality, if you're doing it, and which we'll do now, it'll hardly take a minute or two, provided you have the SDDC deployed, which is a prerequisite, and you also have FSx for ONTAP deployed in place. And you can see the NFS v3 data stores that are mounted here. This reference architecture shows 2 data stores, but as I mentioned, you can go up to 4 data stores. Now, so you might be wondering, NiMo has been talking about automated failover, transparent failover, everything works when the node fails, and so on, from an FSx for ONTAP standpoint. Let's look at this in a graphical representation again. So if you see here, when you have data store deployed, as you can see, here is the SDDC. So from the previous slide to this slide, the position of SDDC has changed. The SDDC is actually on the left side, and you have got the VPC where FSx ONTAP is running is on the right-hand side. You can see the data stores are mounted. It's all running from availability zone. Say now, if there is a failure in that particular zone for some reason, or from that particular storage standpoint, the floating IP will automatically get updated, and the volumes, will be accessible from the second zone. Ain't that cool? That is the functionality that FSx for ONTAP provides, for VMware SDDC as well as for other workloads. Now, we spoke about the reference architecture. I'm sure you guys are getting excited. Now, let's talk about the performance aspect, because it's key to talk about the performance too, right? So from performance standpoint, you can go up to 500 megabytes per second with a single data store. Keep in mind, AWS limits every stream, TCP stream, with 5 gigabits upper limit. That means you can go up to 600 to 625 megabytes per second. And based on our testing, you can go up to 450 to 500 megabytes per second with a single data store. That means if you add multiple data stores, in this case 4, you can go and get more than 500 for a single data store, because you've got 4 now. That means you will get up to 2 gigabytes of throughput. And not just that, that means you can actually add additional host, and you can actually increase and scale your throughput. Ain't that cool? That's again the simplicity that we are offering. So now, from an integration standpoint, we spoke about transit gateway, right? And this is something that we are being very transparent. We want to make sure our partners and customers understand this when designing the solution. So if you are designing the solution and you're wondering, hey, you spoke about transit gateway, what is the data egress cost that I need to consider in this solution? So it's very simple. So if you take the amount of data that is being transferred, aggregated across all the virtual machines, you would see that there is a data processing fees for it, and that is something that you need to keep in mind. Now, we spoke about the data store support. Now let's look at, is it just for data store support from a VMware standpoint? No. As we mentioned, FSx for ONTAP supports all the protocols. That means it supports NFS v3, v4.1, supports SMB. It also supports iSCSI, and you can also have multi-protocol support. That means, apart from being a data store, you can also use this with your guest virtual machines and provide iSCSI protocol or say NFS mounts onto the guest virtual machines, depending upon the workload nature. So as you can see here, there is single AZ deployment as well as multi-AZ deployment. Although with Datastore, we are supporting multi-AZ now, but with guest virtual machine accessing FSx for ONTAP, you can use both single AZ as well as multiple AZ. With multi-AZ deployment, you can actually use the transit gateway and then connect the SMB and NFS endpoints. And if you have single AZ, then you can actually use SMB, NFS, and iSCSI via the connected ENI that is sitting here. So this, if you're wondering what is the use case, many customers run their database workloads and other workloads using guest storage, and FSx for ONTAP is the only storage within AWS that can do both, which is data store support as well as guest storage. That means it enables you to consolidate the storage while complementing vSAN that is coming along with every host by default. So this solution is always complementing what vSAN offers from each host standpoint. And that's where it becomes an ultimate solution for every customer. Okay, so now let's talk about the use case. We did discuss about this. Now, just to actually summarize it, the use cases are pretty simple. You have the ability to actually scale the storage without adding additional horsepower or additional host. That means you are dynamically managing your cost and making sure your cost is in line with what your planning is. It also allows you to avoid replatforming your infrastructure, because when you're migrating, you can focus on the applications and just do the migration by using simple vMotion techniques or using FSx. That in essence enables you to actually leverage your existing tools and processes. You don't have to go through the complex conversion processes. Now, if you look at hyperscalers, that's the approach that they're taking, because that makes life easy for every customer to migrate their workloads rather than going through conversion of VMDK and then applying agents on every virtual machine and so on. It makes life easy. Now, if you look at it, this is one easy approach to actually get your migration done to cloud sooner. And there is no application downtime. Plus, you don't have to worry about the IP addressing. Leveraging FSx, you can actually re-IP the virtual machines as well. Now, along with that, you also get multiple data stores and you get data management capabilities. So these are the use cases. Now, if you're thinking, hey, how do I get started with the customer? And if you're a customer, you're thinking, hey, what is the use case for me? The simplest answer is just look at your workloads and the storage footprint, and that would automatically tell you, hey, this is the right solution that I should be choosing. Now, to quickly take an example, we spoke about the TCO optimization and so on. You might be wondering, you've been talking about it, but give us an example. So let's look at it on the slide, and then we'll talk about the estimator that we have actually built. So this is an example where customer has a requirement of 45 terabyte and around 150 VMs. The customer was currently running with 6 i3 metal, which we spoke about, i3 EN metal, which is providing around 45 terabyte capacity. Sorry, was running with i3 metal, with 6 of them, not i3 EN. Then by adding FSx, they were able to actually reduce the host count by 2. Instead, use 4 i3 metal, which provides you 10.37 terabyte per host, along with FSx. And that was able to help them in reducing the total cost of ownership by 25%. And sorry, I mentioned i3EN. It wasn't i3EN, it's i3. And this is a slide. I got confused with the slide. So in this slide, as you see, there's a customer, a mid-size organization who was running with 400 VMs and around 150 terabyte of storage. They were running with 30 i3 EN metal hosts, and we were able to actually help them to reduce it to 30 i3 metal hosts with FSx. And FSx is a short form for FSx ONTAP. So that's the capability, and you can see we were able to reduce and optimize this spend by another 49%. Cool. So that brings us to the demos now. So till now it's been, the slides, I wouldn't say it's the boring part, but it's more about the theoretical aspect. But now comes the most interesting part where we talk about, hey, how is this integration done in real time? Let's look at that. So for that, let me switch my screen and let me go into my demo environment. So just give me a minute. I'm sure you're able to see my screen okay here. So with that said, so what you see on the screen now is my on-premises environment, which is running ESXi 7.0.3, and you can see that here. And I've got a 3-host cluster in my on-premises environment. And here it is my AWS account. And I have got my VMware Cloud console here. So let me just go in. I'll just authenticate here as well. So we're good. And this is my cloud SDDC. That is my cloud vCenter. So I have my on-premises vCenter here. I have my cloud vCenter here. So let's start with mounting a data store, and let me show you how easy and simple it is. So as I said, to start with, you need to go to VMware Cloud Console. Within the VMware Cloud Console, you will access your SDDC, and that's right here. So in this case, I have a single node SDDC, and you can see it right here. So while it comes up, okay, so it's coming up now. So you can see it's a single node SDDC, yeah, and that it is an i3 node, which means I've got 512 gig and 10.37 terabyte of capacity. So you can go inside and you would actually see the option to mount the data store. So this is very similar to the traditional way where you use vCenter to mount a data store or attach a data store. Here, you don't have the ability to do that using vCenter. So that's why VMware has introduced that as a storage option within VMware Cloud Console. And you can see, you can click on Attach Data Store, and that would actually give you a couple of parameters, same as what you have been using in on-premises, right? So now we'll keep it here. Let's go back to the AWS console and then talk about FSx for ONTAP. So all you need to do is go into the console and search for FSx. And then you get FSx in there, select FSx, from the drop-down option, and then you get FSx port console. So in here, for the purpose of the demo, I've already created a file system. However, just for you guys to know, if you want to deploy FSx for ONTAP file system, it takes around 25 to 30 minutes to create a new file system. Once you have the file system, then you can actually create a number of volumes. Creating a volume takes a couple of seconds. That's the turnaround time. So when you're planning, all you need to keep in mind is to provision a file system, it takes up to 30 minutes. That is it. Once it is done, then you can actually get going. As we discussed, you can go up to 192 terabyte of capacity on a single file system. So, it kind of caters for most of the workloads out there. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm using a small capacity and small throughput. Although from a data store standpoint, generally, the capacity is large, but just for the purpose of this demo, I've kept it small, but you can actually start with 10 terabyte, 20 terabyte as well. And the throughput, again, as I mentioned, the recommendation for VMware data store support is 512 and above, but just to keep my cost down, I've actually kept it 128, right? Now, to show you what we were talking about, here you can actually change your storage capacity. This is the file system capacity. As I said, you start with this minimum. This is 1 terabyte is the minimum. Now, if you start with 1 terabyte or say 4 terabyte or 10 terabyte, that is your base file system capacity. You cannot come down that. You can always scale up, but you can actually shrink down from there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But apart from that, you can actually, increase and decrease and shrink any parameter like the volume size, the throughput, or the IOPS. So you can see here, you can change the IOPS, and you can even say, oh, give me 40,000 IOPS. And it'll actually, add the appropriate amount of disks so as to give you the amount of capacity, this IOPS that is needed. So that means you'll only be charged for the IOPS at that point, and the capacity will still remain the same, right? So I'll not do that. Now, if you want to actually change the throughput, again, you can do that on the fly. So say if you start with 512 and your application needs 1 gigabyte, say from the data store standpoint or for the application itself, then you can actually change that to 1 or 2. And this is absolutely transparent. Ain't that cool? That's the simplicity that I like in these integrations. Now, so we have got the file system created. Now, storage virtual machine is the entity that is part of ONTAP. So those people who are familiar would know it's, part of ONTAP storage system. It's a logical entity. So you have a storage virtual machine created, and that provides you multi-tenancy as well. So the storage virtual machine will have the endpoints. That's where you enable the protocols to say, whether you have NFS, iSCSI, everything enabled. So in this case, you have got NFS and iSCSI enabled by default. You have to use the NFS IP address so as to connect. That is it. Now, let's look at the volume as well. Now, what you need is a volume. The volume is what is going to be mounted as a data store. So in this case, we'll go ahead and create a volume. So this is the file system that we looked at. This is the storage virtual machine where the volume is going to be created. And then we say Datastore 004. So that's the name of the Datastore volume. And we need to specify a junction path. Junction path is required. Now you specify the volume size. So if you see here, the volume size should be specified in megabytes. You can see it here. It's a common mistake that people do. So you have to go up and specify, in megabytes. So you can see here, it's actually going into 1 terabyte. And enable storage efficiency, because so that way you get all the deduplication, compression, everything. And the recommendation is to go with tiering, but with snapshots only. Once you create that, it takes a couple of seconds, as we discussed. Then you can actually change the volume size as well. But then let's give it a couple of seconds to bring up. But in the meantime, you can see there are other data stores that is created. As you can see here, I have DS003, demo DS002, and these data stores are mounted right here. And it's mounted from the same endpoint, and it's an NFS data store. And there are virtual machines that is actually migrated from on-premises onto this environment. As you can see here, I've just used Photon OS virtual machines, but they are migrated from on-premises and they're actually deployed onto the data store, and they're actually running from here. And this was done with HCX network extension. That means there was no need to do a re-IP. It actually logically extended and created a segment from my on-premises VLAN so that it's using the same IP address. So now coming back here, as you can see here, couple of seconds, the data store volume is created. So come in here, you see it's 1 terabyte. We specify the tiering policy to be snapshot only. We have the junction path, all good. Now we go back to SVM, so as to get the NFS IP address, copy the NFS IP address, come back in here to the VMware Cloud Console, access the storage tab, which we had already selected earlier, click on attach data store, select that cluster. In this case, I just have this cluster, so I'm good. Click on attach data store, and then enter the IP address of the NFS endpoint. And remember, during the reference architecture slide, we spoke about updating the route tables and the security group. That is it. If you have the route tables updated, then the connectivity should be in place, and it'll actually quickly do a check and make sure everything is actually accessible. Now, all of these are documented in the VMware documentation as well as on our side. So we will share that documentation after this particular presentation, so you guys can actually go and actually test it out yourselves too. Now, once it is validated, all you need to do is select the path. As you can see, it's DS004. Select the vendor, which is FSx ONTAP, and then provide a name for the data store. That's it. You click on attach data store. Boom, here comes the magic. Now it is actually attaching the data store. It takes up to a minute to complete the attach process. But before that, you'll see that showing up in the vCenter itself. So we'll look at that to quickly show you that. Sorry about that. So as I said, it takes a couple of seconds, up to a minute. So let's give that time. While it is happening, let's switch to our next demo and we'll come back here. So we spoke about the TCO optimization, the total cost of ownership optimization is going to help deployments with storage intensive workloads and so on. How do we see that in reality, right? How do we actually quickly realize that? This is where we, that means NetApp, along with VMware and AWS, has actually built this calculator. And this is my estimator. I've built this. So if there are any questions, you can always reach out to us by using the feedback option that is available right at the bottom of this page. But let me quickly show you, what this estimator does. It's very simple. All you need is the URL, with the browser. Key in the URL. You can access the same via cloud.netapp.com as well. And then you can use the manual inputs. If you are salesperson or pre-salesperson or, trying to look at the initial numbers, just to get a feel of it, you can use the existing values in there, which are the default values, and then, go for the sizing. Then you don't have to make any changes. Or if you know the environment, you can make the changes as is. And then, look at the storage option. So in this case, we have specified 400 virtual machines, and the virtual CPU to the physical core mapping is 4. And then the number of vCPUs per VM is around 8. And the amount of virtual RAM per VM is 12. And the amount of storage per virtual machine is around 600 per VM, right? Now, with that, you just have to look at, hey, what is the storage requirements that I need? So all you need to specify is out of the capacity that I'm going to deploy in FSx ONTAP, how much is that going to be using databases and virtual machine? And this is based on our experience with customers. We consider 20% for databases out of the overall amount, and the rest of the data is actually virtual machine data. That includes all the virtual machines and all the VMDKs associated with that. And for each of the profile, there are changes, which is actually, based on our testing. Yeah, that is it. And we also allow you to actually automatically understand the transit gateway cost, so you don't have to worry about that. And what we do is we take a percentage of your data, which is generally your working set, and we have an additional buffer added on top of it that is considered to be your data processing charge across the transit gateway. And you can click on submit. Now, that's something that people kind of ask us, hey, is this transit gateway going to exist or remain for long? The answer is we are working on alternative options for Datastore connectivity apart from transit gateway. So that will be gone soon. Again, we cannot commit on specific time. That's a roadmap that VMware will actually talk about. So you can always ask VMware about it. However, just I just want to actually let everyone know that, this is something that we are actively working on, and this will not, this will be something that will be removed in the future. So if you are working on an opportunity, or if you're working for yourselves in your environment, and if you need additional help, feel free to reach out to your VMware or AWS contact, and they will actually help you in actually getting this right-sized. Now, if you see here, the first line is when you're using the host types within AWS VMware deployments, whether it's i3 or i3en. And actually saying, okay, just using the vSAN configuration that comes with the host, you would need around 32 hosts. Yeah, and that would actually be around 2.3 million a year. So this is a 1-year TCO estimation. At the same time, if we complement the vSAN storage by using the same host type, but add FSxN on top of it, that means from a workload standpoint, all it requires from the CPU and memory is just 9 hosts. And then we are adding FSx ONTAP to it to cater the rest of the storage requirements. You can actually make a savings of around 58%. And all of these numbers are derived by making an API call to VMware Sizer, which is a VMware VMC Sizer. And the pricing information is actually also made with a live API call to AWS pricing calculator. So all these calculations are actually coming from the respective vendors, and we are just collating that information and projecting how you can actually use FSx ONTAP. And this is the tool that you should be using now. And this is where even VMware and AWS would actually send their customers to actually look at the ROI estimations. Now, if you're wondering, hey, you put the numbers, that is what you have. What if I want to actually know about my specific environment? Absolutely understood. That is why we have introduced RV Tools import option. Again, all this does is take the RV Tools input, and it'll actually make the API call back to the VMC Sizer again. The same options, if you have your RV Tools, you can actually go in and actually key that, upload that right in there, and specify the options. All of these are part of the JSON payload that we send back to VMware Sizer. And then when you click on submit, you get the response. So since I haven't imported it, you'll still see the same numbers, but it's as simple as that. So this would enable you to actually, look at your calculations. And again, there might be instances where the deployment is not storage centric. And in that scenario, you are better off to actually deploy using the VMware host types and the storage that comes along with it. Now, so we looked at the TCO estimator. Now, if you come back in here, you would see the data store is mounted. And if you come in here to the vCenter to validate it, you would see the data store is mounted here as well. Now, if you want actually, if you're thinking, hey, how do I migrate? I get the point that you can leverage SnapMirror. If you are a customer using ONTAP in on-premises, you can easily use SnapMirror from an NFS data store to FSx for ONTAP and then mount the data store. Yes, that is much possible. What if I'm running non-NetApp storage? Absolutely. It's a valid question. So what you can do is you can leverage hybrid cloud extension from VMware. You can do the site pairing. And in this case, you can see that. It's my lab environment for all the hyperscalers. However, you can look at this. I've got it connected to my VMware Cloud. Now, from an interconnect standpoint, I've got all the appliances deployed as well. I can easily go in and then say migrate, and I can actually migrate the virtual machine. And you can see here, this is where I've migrated from my on-premises straight into my VMware Cloud. And that is using variation. This is using replication-assisted vMotion mechanism. That means there is no downtime. It combines the combination of vMotion as well as the bulk vMotion capability within HCX. But just so that you guys have a fair idea, from a workload mobility standpoint, you can easily use HCX, or you can use SnapMirror, for block level replication if you have on-premises running with ONTAP in there. You can easily use SnapMirror capability either for DR or for, migration as well. The only thing is, there are differences between HCX and SnapMirror. That's something that you have to weigh out. Now, if you see here, you can select the SDDC. And now here you can come in and select a specific virtual machine. So let's say I've got a virtual machine here. So if I select this virtual machine and say add, now you can actually select your target, which is going to be the cluster here, which is the SDDC that we are running. You can select the new data store that we created and then say, choose the migration profile. As I said, you have vMotion, bulk migration, and replication-assisted vMotion. You can take vMotion. vMotion is serial. You can only do one at a time. And then, you click on validate. It'll actually allow you to actually, migrate that, and it'll actually do behind the scenes. It's completely automated. So you can actually select one of the networks. So in this case, I'll take this network. And when you say click on validate, it's going to say everything is good. You can go ahead and actually migrate. That message is because I've got a drive attached to it. So I can say, force unmounted and then validate it. It's going to say, okay, we are good to go. We'll migrate it. And as I said, if you want to extend your network, you can always do that. That is also deployed in this lab, and I can show that as well. But in the interest of time, let me quickly go to the next demo. So the next one is, we spoke about the solution. We spoke about the capabilities, everything. Now, and the TCO aspect. Now, if you're wondering, hey, how do I show this to my customer, or how do I show this to my stakeholders? Do I have to deploy this? Now, if you look at from a cloud deployment options, yes, for anything that you have to do a trial, you always have to go back in and then run through the deployment, which means there is additional cost. However, to simplify that, what we have done is we have introduced a simulator. All you need to do is access the URL using the browser, and then you can actually, walk through these solutions without deploying the solution in real time. That will give you the confidence, because it has step-by-step approach that is being followed. So before you are actually deploying the solution, you get very familiarized with the deployment option. So I'll quickly show you one module here. So this module is about deploying FSx for ONTAP to being a data store for VMware Cloud. So you can see it's a step-by-step walkthrough of the steps, what you follow in the UI, right? So it's just giving you the option to say, hey, we have done done all of this, it's tested, vetted, so that way, you just have to go through this as is. So that way, you're very familiar with this. Okay, so I'll not go through all of them, but you can see there are multiple modules in there. You can select any one of that, and you can always start from the beginning as well, right? And all of these URLs will be provided to you. So with that said, let me switch back to the slide. And we are at the end of the presentation too. So to summarize, so, we saw that, how you can use the TCO estimator as well as the simulator. So on closing, you can see FSx ONTAP helps you to optimize your VMware deployments by right-sizing your infrastructure and providing you with multiple data stores, a similar feeling like what you have in the on-premises world. It combines new levels of simplicity, cost, data management, data mobility. So what are you guys waiting for? Get started with, doing a POC, or look at how you can actually, implement it in your infrastructure, or help your customers with the right solution. With that, thank you for taking the time and listening to this webcast. Now, with that said, let me hand it back to John, and we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Niyaz. It was really great. Interesting to see the demos and real life example on deploying the solution in the cloud. And it seems quite easy, right? I have a question for you, Niyaz, as well. So what's the possibilities if you don't want to go through the investment of setting up the VMC cluster, but you want to have the ability to do it at a later stage? Is that possible? To have it like a disaster recovery solution?
Yes, so that's a good point. So as I mentioned, so the question is, can we use this as a disaster recovery solution and then do not set it up from a cluster standpoint? So yes, this is a scenario where you can use zero compute footprint. When I say zero compute footprint, zero number of hosts. If you are running ONTAP in on-premises, you can easily use SnapMirror. Just enable SnapMirror replication to FSx ONTAP in the respective VPC. And in the event of the failure, depending upon your SLA, you can bring up the VMware Cloud SDDC and attach the hosts, attach the FSx and volumes, and then register the VMs. That's very much possible. So that way you can actually save the cost and have a zero footprint disaster recovery solution. Thanks, John, for asking that question.
Yeah, and I guess it will take some manual work to bring the cluster up. But I guess if it's a third site that you want to do, like having the data on a third site and be able to spin up a cluster, I guess it would be okay to have maybe a couple of days to set up the VMC environment.
Yes, or you can also have a pilot light cluster. So you can have 2-node cluster for DR, so that way, depending upon your SLA, so that way you can have the host running there, but it's minimal amount because you're only paying for the 2 hosts in there, and then have all your data replicated to FSx ONTAP, and the event of the failure, just attach them back. So that way, you can even have the secondary site itself considered as the DR site. So yeah, as you said, we can fit that into the appropriate model. We can slice and dice it the way we want it.
Yeah. And I think that's the strength of the cloud, as well as you touched upon earlier, that it's possible to be agile and spin up things as you need them. So correct. That's the power. So thank you, Niyaz. Do we have any more questions in the chat? I can't see any right now, but if anyone has the questions, it's the time to point them out now.